the thing about communism. When it comes knocking at your door, it doesn't say, "Hi, I'm here to impoverish, enslave, and murder you." It says, "I'm here to liberate you from oppression."
This is the hill I'm going to die on.
So we're moving very rapidly toward a one-world educational system and a one-world religious system and a one-world government.
Communism is like an international cancer. It must spread to survive.
Communism doesn't work. It is on the ash heap of history.
If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? When Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better red than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance.
I was a child of the 80s, and I have to say I had a pretty good public school experience. I remember at one of my elementary schools, they would blast Stars and Stripes Forever and other patriotic songs from the intercom pretty much every morning. I had some really great teachers in my school years who challenged and inspired me. Of course, I always had friends of different races and religions, and it was normal. I remember the early 90s well, when the Berlin Wall fell and communism in the Soviet Union collapsed.
Gorbachev has been removed from power.
And though I didn't fully understand it at the time, I remember watching things on the news and really sensing that the world was changing in big ways. I remember feeling excited for people in former communist lands that they were now going to be able to enjoy freedom, a lot of them for the very first time in their lives.
That's wonderful.
My experience with Russia began with going there in the late 90s for a year and a half as a missionary after I finished college. Some of the things that stood out to me the most from this time were how much harder life was in Russia than what I was used to. People had to make do with a lot less. The average pay for a Russian at that time was about $30 per month. I remember meeting Carl, an elderly man who was a double leg amputee in a wheelchair. Carl had served in the Soviet Red Army in World War II to help defeat the Nazis. He had been captured and put in a Nazi POW camp, and then when he was released, They put him in the gulag because supposedly he was an enemy of the state. Having spent time in a Nazi prisoner camp, that meant he might have collaborated with the Nazis. So I'd never heard of the gulag before this, but I saw the trauma that Karl carried with him. I came back to the US and ended up in graduate school getting a dual master's in Russian language and literature and Russian and East European studies. And I got an education in some things that, as it turns out, are really helpful to understand a lot of trends in our country today. Like, what is going on with education? What is up with all the focus on things like systemic racism and trans rights? And why is Christianity so much on the decline in America? Is all this happening organically, or could there be more to the story? And some things I'll share are going to be shocking and unsettling, but learning ugly aspects of history, it's really important to help us avoid making the same mistakes again. So this is the modern-day Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians, and they all originated around the city of Kiev. The Prince of the Rus, Volodymyr, he'd been searching, kind of shopping for a religion, and he settled on Byzantine or Orthodox Christianity. Through the centuries, pagan mysticism kind of became interwoven with Orthodox beliefs and practices and holidays. So for hundreds of years, the Orthodox Church, with a strong touch of pagan folklore, that was the unifying cultural glue of Russian society for the commoner and the aristocrat. The seal of the Russian Empire was a two-headed eagle. One of the heads was the head of state, the Tsar, and the other was for the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. So this indicated that the church and state were one. So there was a sense of guilt among some in Russia's upper class at how far behind the Russian peasantry was lagging in terms of their quality of life and education. And the writings of Karl Marx became really attractive to the educated intelligentsia class as a way to remedy this disparity. A Marxist revolution prepares a society to embrace communism, enacted through violent means. The Bolsheviks were promising bread and land to the peasants. So you can see how very well-meaning people were very easily bamboozled by the message of communism with its promises of helping the underprivileged. But the problem with communism is that in order to make a society where everyone has equal outcomes, you have to consolidate and centralize all power in the government. This consolidation of power, it always leads to tyranny. One of the key tenets of communism is that anything is justified, anything at all. Murder, violence, terrorism, deception, if it's in the name of helping the oppressed. The Russian Orthodox Church was just as much a target as the monarchy. There were thousands of churches demolished, icons burned, and many of the remaining churches were desecrated and then repurposed into like museums of religion and atheism and recreation centers. Clergymen, monks, and nuns were tortured, arrested, executed, and imprisoned. There was a report of nuns executed by being placed in boiling cauldrons of tar. One Orthodox priest had his cheeks and eyes gouged out, and he was paraded through town and then buried alive.
My great-grandfather and great-grandmother lived in a small village. I think it was late 1920s. And they had a house. They had 4 kids, and they grew potatoes. One day, their neighbors came, and the whole family was kicked out of the house. They were kicked out on the street because their house was slightly bigger than the houses in the rest of the village. The message from the government was that everyone was supposed to be the same. My great-grandma with 4 little kids started to go from place to place looking for a place to stay and found a basement in some kind of abandoned house. It was just something not even fit to live in, but they could sleep there. And because they had enough food, she asked all of the 4 kids to go and beg on the street. My great-grandfather, he was later, remember I said that he was hiding? He was later found and he was sent to prison camp and he died on the way there. So we know that either he was killed or he starved to death on the way to prison camp. I read it in my grandma's journal. I sobbed.
Another result of the forced collectivization of agriculture was widespread famine. In the early 1930s, about 6 to 9 million people starved to death in the Soviet countryside, particularly in Ukraine. There were reports of cannibalism, with some people having to decide between killing and eating their own children or dying first, and then their neighbors would come and kill and eat their children. Many poets, writers, and even scientists became casualties of arrest, torture, and execution, and imprisonment as well. And their crime was like failing to adequately praise the Soviet state. Then from 1937 to 38, Stalin enacted his purge of the Communist Party, resulting in about 1 million executions.
Neighbors would tell on neighbors, and even family members would tell on family members. In their mind, they were doing something good. And that's the worst part.
In grad school, I decided to write my master's thesis on clandestine Christians in the Soviet Union. I was inspired by the faith of so many of them and just disgusted at the communist regime that broke and destroyed millions of lives in this futile quest of establishing a godless heaven on earth. I wanted to understand how the flame of faith was able to persist in the hostile Soviet environment where militant atheism was the order of the day. In my research, I found that early Soviet tactics of arresting, imprisoning, and executing Christian clergy really backfired and had bred underground religious activity. The first thing the Soviets did was a continuation of what had already worked. This is anti-religious and pro-communist propaganda just broadcast throughout all aspects of the culture, especially the education, media, and the arts, winning the minds especially of children being of the utmost importance. In Soviet schools, all children were taught to read and write, but the major role of the Soviet schools was that of indoctrination centers for atheism and Marxist-Leninist communism. One anti-religious indoctrination technique that they would use, it would go like this. The teacher would say, "Okay, students, let's do a little experiment to see if there is a God. I want you to go ahead and close your eyes, then say a little prayer and ask God to send you some candy. Do that now." Then after a few moments, the teacher would say, "Okay, now open your eyes. Do you see any candy? No. That means there is no God. Now I want you to try something else. Close your eyes now and ask Uncle Lenin to send you candy." And then when the children would have their eyes closed, the teacher would place a piece of candy on each desk. And she would say, "Okay, open your eyes now. Oh, look, children, Uncle Lenin sent each of you a piece of candy. Aren't you grateful for our dear Uncle Lenin?" Many Soviet children became little Octobrists, named after the Bolshevik October Revolution of 1917, about age 7, and most joined the Young Pioneers at age 9, the Communist Children's Organization. Those who qualified could join the Communist Youth, the Komsomol, at age 14. These organizations reinforced children's duties as Soviet citizens, as well as the ideology of Marxist-Leninist communism. All of the children and youth who joined these organizations were expected to be avowed atheists. Conformity was essential.
When I was growing up, I was doing what all kids were doing. I was going to school, and I had no idea that I was being brainwashed. I didn't know because everyone around me was doing what I was doing. Everyone had to be the same, wear the same uniform, the same red bandana, and I kind of questioned it, and I went to school without it. And what happened was my classmates beat me up. I was not doing what I was supposed to do.
From the youngest of ages, Soviet citizens were expected to toe every aspect of the Communist Party line, or there would be consequences. There was no room for the expression of dissenting views. One instance that comes to mind is of a Soviet Baptist named Nikolai Khmara. Khmara was arrested and convicted of, quote, bringing up minors in isolation from social life and calling on believers to reject their responsibilities as citizens, among other things. After 2 weeks in the Gulag, Khmara's dead body was returned to his wife, showing signs of gross torture, including the palms of his hands, soles of his feet, and his toes burnt. His abdomen punctured by a sharp, jagged object, his entire body bruised, and shockingly, his tongue cut out. Here's the story of Ivan Livak, a Jehovah's Witness who was imprisoned for his faith in the 1940s and 50s.
In 1947, I was arrested. The military tribunal sentenced me to 10 years of confinement in remote maximum security camps. They shipped us in cattle wagons to Vorkuta, which is in the remote north of Russia. From there, they loaded us into a steamship, and we sailed for 4 days. From there, we were forced to walk for 4 days and nights. Finally, we arrived at our destination. The work was back-breaking. We worked to build a road and laid railroad track. During the winter, it was dark all the time and very cold. Undress, we were told. We're going to disinfect your clothes. I looked at my body. What a horrible sight. And I looked at the man beside me. The same. Everything had withered. We were nothing but skin and bones. I thought that soon I would die. Many died, young men. Some would deliberately let a hand or a leg freeze and then chop it off to get out of doing this work. It was dreadful, horrible.
Another uniquely awful punishment the Soviet state would inflict on some dissident Christians was forcible internment in psychiatric hospital prisons and forcible treatment with psychotropic drugs to cure them of their delusions about God. There were some who would simply not comply. Some who, in the face of heavy persecution, they just kept insisting on worshiping God according to their own conscience. They refused to abide by the government's restrictions on them for religious practice. And it was these Christians who, after World War II, paid a really steep price for insisting on the full expression of their faith.
My mom told me that when I was born and was a few months old and she was holding me in her hands, the KGB came with the police to grab the people take out from the church. My mom tried to protect my dad, and the KGB general tried to slap her, but actually I was in front of her. And so that's the first experience I have, even before I start to walk, what the communism means for the people.
The dissident Christian movements received special attention in the media in the form of propaganda films and pieces made about them, often depicting them as abusive to their children.
Soviet Union have only like 2 or 3 channels, and it's all controlled by the government from Moscow. So they put the propaganda movies saying that these is Christians that almost killed their children to sacrifice to God. And of course, they compare it from the Bible, Abraham. And they took that and twisted it and say, this is what they do.
Но все чаще и чаще мать усаживает его за Библию.
Those poor children being taught to pray and being forced to read the Bible.
And then, of course, when I went to school, the indoctrination take place, particularly for the kids from the Christian homes. Sometimes in the math class, they can give you literature about Lenin, communism to read and to report to them. And sometimes somebody can beat us, and the school principal won't stop anybody because they try to say that, oh yes, they try to beat their God out of their head.
Soviet authorities would remove children from unregistered Christian families at times and put them in state-run boarding schools or orphanages where they could be liberated from their abusive parents who had been teaching them to pray and believe in God, and where they could be safely indoctrinated into atheism for the rest of their childhood years.
This happened in our church from two different families. The government came and confiscated their kids to the states.
Even people guilty of no crime and they were true believers in the communist state, they could find themselves arrested, tortured, and sentenced to the Gulag. There were these arrest quotas, and upon arrest, the Soviet citizens would be tortured until they would confess to some crime and also give up a certain number of names of other supposed enemies of the state.
Our neighbors, they was told by the KGB to report to the KGB every time we leave the house or we come to the house or anybody come to visit us. They take a notice and report it to the government. Even they put some bugs to listen what's going on.
The dissident Soviet Christians were second-class citizens with a lower social status than rapists and murderers.
The door closed for higher education. You will have the lowest paying jobs in the factory. You cannot be like a leader or the supervisor, or you would even never think about to be a manager.
They lived under the constant threat of police or KGB raids and searches of their homes.
So usually before the arrest, the KGB will come to our home, and usually it's happened like in the middle of the night, and they knock on the door and say, open the door, is the police. They won't care about anything. They can destroy the dishes, or they can throw away anything, and they, of course, turn around the beds to find anything that was written about God. They will confiscate because they say it's propaganda, and so they confiscate, never bring back, never return.
I found the Soviet dissident Christians to be patient and long-suffering. I don't recall seeing any instances of bitterness.
Even the Christ tell about the disciples that the people listen to me, they will listen to you. They will persecute me, they will persecute you. So literally we take the word like it is. And so we wasn't upset or angry about the government officials because they didn't know God.
Throughout the 70 years of Soviet rule, an estimated 12 to 20 million Christians were arrested, imprisoned, executed, or sentenced to the Gulag for their faith. The more mainstream Christians in the Soviet Union were not as heavily persecuted.
The registered church is they signed the pact with the government, and that's a big difference between the registered and unregistered church. All their the top clergy, they are working for the government, and even some of them is appointed by the government.
So the KGB agents would go into the church and then rise up.
That's right. It's all of them is infiltrated. They was told by the officials that they have to work for the government, have to pretend that they're Christians. And of course, all the sermons need to be linked to the government.
As a result of the heavy infiltration of Soviet churches and the restrictions put on them, Soviet church membership in registered churches dropped off considerably from the 1960s and onward. I guess I just never expected to see the same types of things happening here in America.
The communist movement in America is pretty old. Ultimately, It's not about redistributing wealth. It's not about making a fairer society. That's just for the recruits. Communism is about centralizing all wealth and all power in very few hands. They knew right from the start that America could not be taken from the outside. It had to be taken from the inside.
There's this radical misconception among Americans that somehow we had this wonderful government school system and it was just hijacked by communists or hijacked by Marxists. The reality is that it was created by communists for communist purposes. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic sense or in the sense that everybody I disagree with is a communist. I mean, the people who created the system were literally communists. Robert Owen, he thought the problem was that these children had been raised in an environment where Christianity was dominant, where what he perceived as individualism was dominant, and that the real solution was for the government to take over education. And at the time, that was an incredibly radical idea. People don't realize that we haven't had government schools all of human existence. In fact, it's a very new thing. So he wrote these crazy essays, took them to the Prussian dictator, and he says the Prussian dictator so approved of these ramblings about the government taking over education, the alleged desirability of that he ordered his interior minister to start setting up a government school system in Prussia. And he did, and it was the first time in history that we had education of the state, by the state, for the state, with the possible exception of fascist Sparta. For 2,000 years of church history, it was always understood that parents are in charge of educating, raising, and discipling their children, maybe with a supplemental role for the church. Orestes Brownson eventually became a Catholic and repented of his involvement in this wicked operation. But he said, I knew of this because I was part of it, and on the surface, they had two goals. The first one was to shift public opinion to convince the public that government should help educate their children. And the second one was to get legislators on board with this idea, or to get them elected who would support a role for government in education. He said the end goal was the destruction of Christianity. He said the ultimate objective of having government school was to destroy Christianity. Those were his words. It was imported into the United States by another man who rejected the Bible. His name was Horace Mann. Imports this Prussian system. That's where government schools really took root in America. He went around the country like a traveling evangelist, preaching the good news of government education. Then along comes John Dewey, another actual communist. In the truest sense of the term, this guy went to the Soviet Union and was singing the praises of the Soviet system. He was a big advocate of dumbing down the children, because the Rockefellers had a foundation, I guess, at the time called the General Education Board. And they put millions of dollars behind John Dewey's efforts, back when millions of dollars was an unfathomable amount of money. And it wasn't just Rockefeller, the Carnegies, many of these very, very wealthy families wanted to create an educational system that would basically create standardized, unquestioning, robotic worker drones. And so the communists had a vested interest in this. The humanists had a vested interest in this. They wanted to turn children away from their families, from the church, from Christianity, from their individualism. So that's where this very bizarre collaboration between communists and Marxists, socialists, collectivists with the super capitalists of the day came into being. After World War I, they sent the men all off to die in this war that nobody really understood. Then they said, well, the women have to go run the factories because the men aren't there. Who's going to make the bombs and the planes and whatever? Then the children were at home by themselves. And they said, well, we got the public schools here. Why don't you just send them there? And that was really a turning point in American history when the vast majority of American children then were being educated by government. And it all went downhill from there.
The government gained control of the education of nearly every child in America.
Communism is an inversion of Christianity, and it's very good at manipulating Christian values to get Christians to go along with it.
Somebody walking through down the streets waving a red flag, shouting off some communist message will get ignored in America. But if a pastor is saying the same thing in slightly different terms with a little bit of a Christian veneer on it, people will accept it. So the American communists started infiltrating the churches.
We have Walter Rauschenbusch, a socialist and highly influential clergyman in America. He wrote the book, A Theology for the Social Gospel, where he claimed that socialism is the end goal of Christianity.
Communists under Harry Ward set up a big base in Union Theological Seminary in New York.
He taught at that seminary for 25 years, influencing thousands of aspiring ministers. He was also a co-founder of the American League Against War and Fascism that later became the Communist Party USA.
Capture the seminaries, then you capture the pastors and priests, so you capture the laity and you capture the spiritual life of the entire community.
There was Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, a prominent Baptist preacher. He denied the virgin birth of Jesus during a Sunday service in 1922 and then repeated this view while he was pastor at Rockefeller's famous Riverside Church.
Antonio Gramsci is an Italian, and he's sitting there thinking, what is it that Marx got wrong? Why does the West repel communism? And he realized that the West has very strong cultural institutions, and that those cultural institutions are very effective at transmitting values from one generation to the next. This is where Antonio Gramsci said, well, if we're going to take over the West, if we're going to get communism in the West, if we're going to achieve his main goal, which was, and I quote, socialism is precisely the religion that must overcome Christianity throughout the West. If we're going to do that, we have to infiltrate the cultural producing institutions, take them over, and make them produce communist culture instead. And he identified 5 key institutions to take over society. They are religion, family, education, media, and law. If you get those, you can turn a society. You can, in 1 generation or 2 generations, transform the culture from within using education and media. You can dismantle the family that might hold things together. You can transform faith so that it's a fake imitation of real religion that promotes communist values. And you can subvert the law so that when you end up, say, trying to stop some of the things that are happening and you take them to court, the judge rules the wrong way.
With Operation Mockingbird that began in the 1940s, the CIA was found to have trained a number of journalists in propaganda techniques and then fed them the talking points. Joseph Fletcher was a prominent pastor. He taught at the Episcopal Theological College beginning in 1944. And at the same time, he was an active participant with the Communist Party USA. Eventually, he left the priesthood and Christianity. He became openly atheist and began advocating for forced euthanasia of undesirable children up to the age of 9 or 10.
You can read the book Manning Johnson talking about using what was a communist manipulation that's not critical race theory, but using race to try to divide America.
And there are certain people who are using the Negro in order to establish their power in Washington. And the Negro is just merely a pawn in a game that's bigger than he is. Beneath all of the racial unrest, at the root of all racial unrest in the country is the clammy, cold, bloody hand of communism.
Then we had the formation of the National Council of Churches.
Half of America's Christian denominations, 45 million Christians, were and are members of,
which was affiliated with the World Council of Churches, which was dominated to a large degree by the Russian Orthodox Church, which by that time was totally under the control of the KGB. By the 1950s, the communists had pretty much taken over most of the mainstream churches.
I mean, you see Bella Dodd in 1953 giving her testimony saying that they've infiltrated both political parties in 1953, kind of the glory anti-communist days.
She'd put up to 1,100 young men into the Catholic priesthood to work their way up through the church. They were communists. They were actual communists.
You know, Senator McCarthy was trying to push communism out of its infiltration into entertainment and media, Hollywood, politics, and ended up getting politically wrecked for his efforts, although he was certainly right about much of what he was saying, if not almost all of what he was saying. And Khrushchev bragged about it. You know, we'll take America without firing a shot through infiltration and subversion.
Communist infiltration into America's churches also occurred at a grassroots level.
Communists started telling their people, if you're brought up a Baptist, we want you to go back into the Baptist church. If you're brought up Roman Catholic, we want you to go into the Catholic church, become a priest if you can. If you're brought up in the Mormon church, go back to the temple. If you're brought up Jewish, go into the synagogue, because they understood what do communists and revolutionaries want. They want money, they want influence, they want respectability, and the church provides all of those things.
Liberation theology was a KGB invention. It's been called Marxist class struggle sprinkled with holy water. So in the 1960s, they retooled Marxism to overtake Latin America using Catholic priests to mobilize the peasants to rise up in violent guerrilla warfare against the landowners.
Liberation theology has led to basically communist Latin America, and black liberation theology is leading us to a socialist America. It isn't designed to get people to heaven. It's designed to turn people into revolutionaries that hate their country and want to divide their country and create chaos. It's as unchristian as you can possibly imagine.
No, not God bless America, God damn America.
Dom Helder Camara was a man that was a priest in a place called Recife, Brazil. He was known as the Red Bishop. He becomes someone who speaks very fondly of folks like Mao Zedong. And along with that, he starts bringing these ideas to the Roman Catholic Church. He has tremendous sway. Then what happens is there is something called the Pact of the Catacombs. And that's where a lot of the priests and bishops from South America and other places where socialism was a bit more popular all got together in the catacombs of Rome, and they signed the Pact of the Catacombs. And within that Pact of the Catacombs, what it basically says is that we're going to bring about a new order to the world and a new order to the church. And Dom Helder Camara had a massive influence, not just on what was happening within the Roman Catholic Church, but Dom Helder Camara really had a great impact on another young man. This other young man was someone who was basically under the mentorship at Harvard University under Henry Kissinger, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski. This young man ended up spending some time in the favelas of Brazil, and he would state that the one man that had more impact on his life and the decisions that he would make would be Dom Helder Camara. The man that said that was Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum.
Was probably a crucial moment in my life. I met priest Don Helder Camara, and I said, I have to invite this bishop to Davos. But then when I came back in Switzerland, I found out that actually he was forbidden at that time to speak in Switzerland because he was considered to be a communist, and that's where I had to stand to my values.
Henry Giroux, education theorist, says that his most important praxis, his practice of communist theory, was going around and getting radicals tenured as professors of education in schools of education all over North America. Over 100. The teachers' unions are a wholly political entity. They are virtually draconian in how they demand, teachers behave and members behave. And their agendas are outright, at this point, Marxist. Yuri Beznomov warned about it. Communism has been trying to infiltrate America from the beginning, that you guys are basically almost gone. And in 1984, he was saying that.
It's a great brainwashing process, which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged. The result you can see. Most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them.
They focus on attacking conservative fringe groups. The real target is mainstream Christianity. But by attacking the fringes, you intimidate everybody else.
The way things are supposed to happen in this country is when someone's suspected of a crime, even if it's capital murder, we give them a trial. The jury finds them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt before they go to sentencing. Then a jury or a judge sentences them, and an appeals court makes sure the trial was conducted with due process. And then and only then do we kill them. We don't kill them first, like happened in Waco.
Everybody deserves due process of law. Cult members, persons falsely accused, you and I, we all deserve due process of law. Most of the people there were innocent of any crime at all. Let them go through the justice system.
I hope very much that others who will be tempted to join cults and to become involved with people like David Koresh will be deterred by the horrible scenes they have seen over the last 7 weeks.
Global education bodies, such as the UN and UNESCO, they've shown their hand that their goal is world domination of education so they can frame the viewpoints of the entire world population.
Bill Gates, I call him Bill Gates of hell. Bill Gates went over to UNESCO headquarters and met with the head of the UN, and they came up with this agreement. He signed it on behalf of Microsoft, and they agreed that they were going to come up with global education standards, global curricula, global teacher training programs, global technology systems to make it all possible. And he came back to the United States and started pouring millions and then billions of dollars into something we call today Common Core. I mean, if you look at what's happening in schools, this is not education in the traditional sense of the term. This is behavioral training. This is basically a supercharged version of what Pavlov was doing with his dogs. And it's become very advanced with the computers that they use now. They give people, these children, automatic stimulus and responses.
A dumbed-down populace led by emotion and accustomed to the constant instant reward of dopamine hits for clicking the right boxes, it's easier to control than a rugged, skeptical, critically thinking populace.
Do you know how many states there are in total in the U.S.?
100.
What state is Utah in?
Michigan?
Do you know how many dimes there are in the dollar? Make up $1.
I don't know.
Can you name 3 countries besides the USA?
I suck at history. Oh my god. Huh? Ah!
How many Kardashian sisters can you name?
Is that all? That's all.
Yeah, that's all of them for sure. Yeah, dude, you're a genius.
Seeing outright Marxist initiatives didn't really start to become obvious until Obama's tenure in office.
By 2013, under President Obama, it became legal to openly propagandize to the American public. More recently, the FBI and federal government have been caught dictating to social media companies what stories they should or shouldn't allow on their platforms.
As you know, we're in a regular touch with social media platforms.
Communists infiltrated Hollywood in order to soften Americans' opinion on communism. We've been fed a steady diet of Christians portrayed as naive simpletons or control freak authoritarians. Little by little, like the frogs slowly being boiled in the pot, Americans have accepted entertainment and media portraying looser and looser sexual values. Drag shows for children and gender-bending characters on preschool programs, and sex changes for the cartoon characters.
There's a book called The Critical Turn in Education by a Marxist educator named Isaac Gottesman. The very first sentence in the book asks, where did all the 60s radicals go? And he answers in the next sentence, not to the religious cults, not to yuppiedom, but to the classroom. So the universities, I guess, are the crown jewel of the Marxist march into the West. It's a very, very simple kind of multi-generational strategy to take over something. You take over the colleges of education, then you take over all the teachers, then you take over all the students, and thus you get the future. The main thing communists want are your kids. They see in the family the reproduction of values from one generation to the next. That reproduction has to be interrupted. So they have to not just get a hold of your kids and brainwash them to believe in communism and to push communism. They have to get a hold of your kids so that you can't, as they would say it, brainwash them first. Children, as it turns out, are a lot more impressionable than adults. It's very easy to convince children of something that's not true or not totally true than it is to convince adults, because their brains haven't completely formed yet. They haven't fully developed. They're still learning, even to the level of who they are and identity. Their media environment is saturating them with a certain kind of messaging.
Now we're in the end stages of a communist takeover of America's K-12 education, with wokeism being pushed at every hand.
Systemic racism, systemic homophobia and transphobia, systemic sexism. In other words, your entire social and political existence is contoured by these really unjust systems of domination and power that don't simply go away by themselves. In fact, they perpetuate themselves. And so being woke means that you're aware of this and that you're aware that you need to denounce it.
With wokeism, you've got critical race theory, where the oppressed class is people of color, and the oppressors are whiteness, white supremacy, and systemic racism.
First, I don't like the idea of teaching children that they're victims of any kind. And I come from the highest level of victim, marginalized, whatever. You are teaching people to be miserable and to live in a sense of constant misery. I find that extremely abusive to do to any single child.
With woke Marxist queer theory, the oppressed class is gays, and the oppressor class is something called heteronormativity.
We're undermining parents, or we're undermining the family unit by saying that it's destructive to have any sort of heteronormative society, which is really what most of society is generally composed of. We're setting up future generations who don't have the correct structure, the correct normal structure, that the God-given structure that we were born into. It took a man and a woman to make this child.
There's gender theory, with transgender individuals as the oppressed class and so-called cis-normativity as the oppressor, where males are males and females are females. And then let's not forget radical feminism and fat studies. The red flags that you're looking at a Marxist playbook are this oppressed versus oppressor framework, the constant harping on grievance, even of things in the very distant past, and also the advocating for tearing down the systems of power by any and all means as a supposed solution. Wokeism calls for viewing all of history, all of society, through the single lens of oppressed versus oppressor power dynamics. It demands its adherents destroy and dismantle key institutions of society, violently if need be.
It started to become undeniable when they launched the revolution in 2020. This subversion, 100 years old now, is happening. 1-2 punch of COVID lockdowns and COVID hysteria, along with the race riots following the death of St. George Floyd.
The same communist tactics to overtake culture and destroy Christianity that I studied in graduate school occurring here in America. One reason so many people go for the Marxist playbook is that there is some truth to what the Marxists claim. And again, the promises of an equitable future where no one is left behind, it can really sound good. But communism marries a truth to a lie. It's an obvious fact, that people of color experienced racism and discrimination in America, especially before the Civil Rights Movement. But the lie is the methodology and solutions that the Marxists promote will actually benefit the oppressed.
Well, it's nasty and subtle in education. Truly, truly vile. Because they take things that are very innocuous and turn them into politics. Here's a real example from a real teacher training. Johnny is riding in the car with his mom and dad on the way to the amusement park. The amusement park is 50 miles away. They've driven 30 miles. How much further is there to go? And so the point of a word problem in an academic setting, period, is can you take words, transform that into mathematical expressions and equations, solve the problem, and then express the solution to the mathematical part back in words. And obviously in this case it's 20 miles. Second graders need to learn how to do that. Well, the teachers are taught, let's get excited about this class. Who's been to an amusement park? Not everybody has been. So amusement park is a weapon in this word problem. No parent would recognize it, but it's a weapon because then the next question is, wow, some of you guys have been to amusement parks, but some of you haven't. Because, some kids will raise their hand. Have you been? Have you not? Why is it that some kids have been and some kids haven't? Let's explore the difference. Some people can't afford it. If there's a racial disparity, till somebody points that out. Maybe the teacher might volunteer it if there happens to be that. Maybe it's, well, some parents say yes, my parents say no. Well, what about parental authority? So now you have the opportunity to have conversations about socialism, about critical race theory and race dynamics, which is race socialism, or about the role of parental authority. The school is on the side of the kids and the parents are the enemy, which is classic kind of communist anti-family activism brought down to the kids. Separate the kids, but get them to distrust their parents and trust the administrators. The sexual politics are easy. Do all families have a mom and a dad? Let's talk about it, kids.
Another thing with the potential to further disconnect children from their parents, making America's children that much more susceptible to the groomer agendas, is whole child education.
There's a model that's called the WISC model, which is a kind of a stupid acronym because it's whole school, whole community, whole child. So WSCC, somehow the other W's fall out, but whatever. WISC is how it's pronounced. Now the idea is that, well, the school is going to do the same thing, whole child education. It's going to take care of all of the child's needs.
Social emotional learning was originally brought into schools under the guise of teaching kids how to recognize and manage their emotions, develop caring and concern for others, establish positive relationships, make responsible decisions, and handle challenging situations effectively. And they changed it to a thing called transformative social emotional learning, which is social emotional learning taught a completely different way through a racial and equity lens.
It's just outright a trick. Equity sounds like equality. It's not equality. It sounds almost like better equality. It's not equality. Equity is, to get technical with you, it is an administered political economy in which shares are adjusted so citizens are made equal. Equity is just the word socialism in a new wrapper.
They have to teach the power dynamics of society. So white children learn that they are privileged, that they have supremacy in our culture, and that they have a thing called implicit bias, which means that just because of the color of their skin, that they're automatically racist.
They want them having their heartstrings tugged on, constantly thinking emotionally. If we aren't allies, then the most vulnerable people are going to have this really unfair life.
They teach the white kids, because of their position of power, that it's their job, if they want to truly be like what social emotional learning teaches, empathetic and compassionate, that they have to become allies and activists for these causes that help to dismantle the systems of America.
We're going to put these things on you that don't need to be on you. We're going to put a lens of oppression on you That's part one. But part two is to bring in social justice. And so they must dismantle the system. Ethnic studies in K through 12 education must be guided by critical race theory.
They say social and emotional learning is supposed to help America's school children become more resilient.
And then immediately when you realize resilience means swallowing your brainwashing and not fighting back.
As they need social emotional learning to kind of break through the cognitive dissonance that happens with kids when they're confronted with values, attitudes, and beliefs that kind of don't go along with their familial and cultural, religious and cultural beliefs. They're using social emotional learning and mental health as a kind of entry point to completely medicalize our schools and turn them into basically mini hospitals. You know, it really kind of started with social emotional learning, and now they're saying that social emotional learning is in every subject. So kids have to learn these skills, and of course they're using the mental health crisis brought about by COVID and children not being able to be with their friends and feeling isolated in order to bring in all this funding that is helping all of this stuff come into the schools. They've hired new social workers, they've hired psychologists. We have people at the UN level, as well as Planned Parenthood, pushing for comprehensive sexuality education in schools. So kids can be taught sexual and reproductive health at school. They can be prescribed puberty blockers at school. They're trying to take away parental rights to decide medical things for their child. So they're trying to say the kids have a right to say whether or not they get vaccinated at school. And we saw this happen. They need these kids to be wards of the state.
And they'll say it's data-driven. Well, that's a trick. You think, wow, that means that they've done lots of research, empirical studies, and they know how well it works, and it's going to help these kids with whatever. It's going to increase learning outcomes. By the way, use your eyes and ears. Are the kids learning to read? No. Are they learning math? No. Is it increasing learning outcomes? No. And of course, they're going to say, well, that's because we don't have enough social emotional learning to overcome their trauma, and then they'll learn more later. That's the typical lie. Use your eyes and ears. It doesn't. But they're saying data-driven. So you think social emotional learning is data-driven. They have science behind it. It's the science. Follow the science. Listen to science. Believe science, like we're all supposed to. Well, the fact of the matter is what it actually means is the way that it works is through data. It is driven by data, by the data that they extract out of your kids.
Yeah, the data collection is absolutely critical to this whole operation because they need the data to figure out whether their brainwashing is working. So they'll ask them survey questions like, what gender do you identify as? Male, female, bigender, trigender, transgender, well, whatever it is. That gets these kids thinking that this is normal, that this must be how other people think. They ask little kids, 10, 11, 12 years old, how many sexual partners have you had? Well, what do you mean? They're 10, right? What's wrong with you? And so these little kids look at this and think, oh, well, maybe it's normal to have more than 20 sex partners by the time you're 12.
So they're kind of doing it through this very manipulative way, helping them to feel belonging, having them be vulnerable with other students in class so they feel like they belong to that group more than they belong to their family. I mean, what they are doing is literally cult indoctrination. It does really parallel what happened with Mao's Cultural Revolution.
But unfortunately, we have utterly red-washed education, so we don't know what creeping communism looks like. We don't know what a cultural revolution looks like, even when it's happening to us. What Mao did was he categorized the population into 10 different identity groups based off of communist theory. And 5 of them were the bad guys, and 5 of them were the communist good guys. If you say were wealthy, and I put that in quotes because owning 2 cooking pans might have made you wealthy. Rather than like one thing, you have like 2 things to rub together. Now you're wealthy. Well, if you were that, your children were too.
and they got bullied at school, they got mistreated at school. If you are in a bad identity group, you have to do whatever you can to get out of that. You're going to get treated bad, you're going to get told you're out of line with doctrine, etc. And if you're in the red identity, you get celebrated, you get affirmed, is the language today, right? And the goal was to create a pressure for the kids with black identities who inherited those from their parents to denounce their parents. They often gave themselves new names, which should ring true with the trans thing, right? They gave themselves entirely new identities, with revolutionary identities. And so we have the same thing happening with intersectionality. You get kids feeling bad about their race, can't do anything about that, but you can become an activist, you can become an ally, or you can adopt a queer identity, which is actually yours for the choosing.
There is a top-down push with these ideas that haven't organically arisen out of a necessity for society to evolve. It's coming through propaganda, it's coming through the indoctrination of kids, media, celebrities, influencers, who's being glorified and lifted up, and who's being canceled.
Just as we have seen in the Soviet Union and other communist regimes, there are efforts here in America today to undermine parental authority and even to try to replace parents with the state.
If you actually look at the way that Soviets, and of course Mao did this as well, is that if you weren't raising your kids the right way according to the doctrine, the way you were engaging in child abuse, then you were actually hindering their development. You were holding them back. You were causing them to have psychological and social there's your social and emotional, right, impediments. They're not being raised right. So the state has to protect those children from their evil, awful parents. Well, what do you have in these states passing these laws? These laws that say that they're going to be LGBTQ sanctuaries. Sanctuaries from what? From their own parents. They have to be protected by the kind, nurturing, oh-so-saccharine social worker at the school who will help them and make them feel good and will socially transition them and affirm them. And maybe it's going to be the most affirmation a lot of these slightly dorky kids have ever had. You know, a lot of them are. A lot of them are higher on the autistic spectrum. A lot of them are a little nerdy. A lot of them watch a lot of anime. They're little strange kids. They identify marks that way and then send them off to be love bombed. Hey, maybe you really are a girl, and that's okay. And we're going to throw a party for you. And all the other friends are going to be there. And there's going to be all this glitter and colors and sparklers and rainbows, and everything is going to be awesome. We are dealing with outright communist takeover with the intention of robbing parents of their kids, and in fact, possibly jailing parents for being parents. This is extraordinarily serious. It's not the church anymore. It's not the park or the neighborhood. The centerpiece of society, the building block of society will become the school, which is a clinic, which is everything else, to capture every aspect and angle of the child's life and development. And parents, you guys can just go relax, go enjoy your lives. Just affirm it, or else we're going to take your kids away.
So what you do first in what I would call the woke renaissance between 2008 and 2020 is you really bring in the woke hard. You bring in CRT, you bring in intersectionality. You start telling your congregations that they have secret racism that they're not aware of, and they need to repent.
And I know as a white pastor, I have blind spots, so I am part of the problem.
You have pastors like Willie Rice of Clearwater, Florida, who actually invites a bunch of folks who are critical race theorists on his altar in Clearwater, Florida at Calvary Baptist Church, and they actually promote Robin DiAngelo's white fragility from the altar, and no one blinks an eye. You have, at the Southern Baptist Convention in 2019, a professor from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary who comes up with Resolution 9, which basically says we need to use critical race theory and intersectionality as analytical tools to understand the challenges that we have to our faith and how to really work out our faith with all these things that are happening within the United States and within our churches. But it's necessary to have critical race theory and intersectionality. Now, they will not surpass the Bible in terms of authority, but these are good analytical tools. So you're bringing in Marxism. Over the past 6 years, 7 years, We have effectively exposed the pastors and the theologians that have brought in critical race theory and intersectionality in the church. We've done that. But what's happened is those that even were alongside us when we exposed what was happening in our seminaries, in our churches, in our denominations, in parachurch ministries, is that they haven't had the guts or the intestinal fortitude to tell those people they must leave the ministry. So those people are still in the ministry and they're still in their leadership positions, even though they just prostituted the church. They basically said to everybody that was within their denomination or their church or their seminary, it's time to ask Karl Marx into your heart. And so what we had is we had Karl Marx Story Hour for years. And yet those people are allowed to stay in and even change their mind. I'm sorry. This was a rape of the body of Christ.
So churches are killing themselves trying to be nice. And in fact, it's the way I think of this now is that Jesus commands that we should be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And the communists infiltrated and said, gentle as doves, gentle as doves, gentle as doves. And they let the wise as serpents part wash out.
During the COVID pandemic, we had federal government officials advising leaders of top churches on how to push the official government COVID policy. They were asked to get their members on board with masking and the experimental jab that some call a vaccine. Many of these church leaders complied.
Francis Collins of NIH, talking about pandemics, talking about how to really convince people within their congregations of how to take vaccines. Vaccinations were basically treated like Holy Communion. So you needed to be a part of the new world, to be a part of the released and saved world. You need to first have your vaccination. And if you've had your vaccination, then you can live among people and be free from your sinful past of not being vaccinated. But then that wasn't good enough because that wears off because you have venial sins and maybe some mortal sins. So you got to go back for your booster. And then your third. It's the same system.
Yes, I know you're vaccinated. You're the smart ones, but you know there's people out there who aren't listening to God and what God wants. You know this. You know who they are. I need you to be my apostles. I need you to go out and talk about it and say, we owe this to each other. We love each other. Jesus taught us to love one another. And how do you show that love? But to care about each other enough to say, please get vaccinated because I love you. I want you to live.
All right, now every head bowed, every eye closed. Kyle, can you bring up the Pfizer vaccine? Anybody that wants to be saved from the virus, come on up, repent now.
We had medical apartheid that they put forward with absolute tyranny, that you'd lose your job if you didn't take an experimental shot.
Love thy neighbor means strapping a mask on your face and never seeing grandma and staying at home and wrecking your life and business and your children and everything. That's love thy neighbor somehow.
People incorrectly believe that there's a separation of church and state. There is a separation of church and state, but it's not keeping the church out of the state, it's keeping the state out of the church.
There's a movement, it's called Christian nationalism, and the idea, of course, sounds like you want to make the United States a Christian nation. And it means a variety of things, right? What does that mean? It could mean let's increase the amount of Christian belief in the nation. Let's get more people in civic office that are Christians. Let's bring Christian values into public life more visibly or into elected office more expressly. Let's base our law more expressly on Christianity, or let's in fact have a theocracy. It could be a lot of different things. Now, the hallmark of an op is that there's a vague word that can mean a lot of things that's very polarizing, because it allows you to shift around between different meanings. The left and the government have been harping on the idea of Christian nationalism for 2 decades. They're making documentaries about how it's the biggest problem and biggest danger to the U.S. This is them setting narratives. They set a narrative, wait for a event to happen, a shoe to drop, and then all of a sudden that narrative's in the back of people's heads, and this thing that's a looming menace becomes a clear and present problem we have to change everything to deal with. There's also documentation from the January 6th House Select Committee, as it was called, to investigate that. Multiple, 56-page document, for example, outlining how the true cause of January 6th as an insurrection and an imminent threat to the United States was actually Christian nationalism. And it calls explicitly for two solutions to this problem to prevent the calamity of another January 6th on a greater scale. One is to limit the ability for public officials to express Christianity in public life. So separation of church and state, they call it. And the second is to monitor churches as though they are places that can generate domestic violent extremism. In other words, to put them on government watch lists. And that will be the end of independent Christianity.
This is all according to the dialectic, and this is a very simplified version of the dialectic. But remember that that's problem, reaction, solution. But then what you want to do is you want to create the reaction. And I knew back in 2012 that the reaction to the problem, reaction, solution, would be Christian nationalism.
Christians in particular who have awakened to what's going on are extremely frustrated. They realize the law only works in their favor sometimes, and sometimes it very much doesn't. Sometimes it's very unjust. They realize they are completely silenced through media. They realize that they have very few, something's going on at their school, they show up, they complain to the school basically tells them to pound sand, and they don't really have any recourse. In fact, the only recourse they have is to pull their kids out of school and then deal with the relentless fights where they're going to try to take on and get rid of homeschooling too. So people are very frustrated. When you're very frustrated, you become desperate for solutions, but you also become desperate for emotional release, what's called catharsis. And you want that energy to be able to go somewhere. And so when I look at these kind of more extreme interpretations of what we should do now, take action now, whether it's Christian nationalists, they're pretty big on that. What they're not looking for is solutions. What they are looking for is that emotional release and to take the pent-up emotions of lots of people with them down a path of desperation and foolishness that will be used against us. The communists are brilliant at setting up their opponents to make a mistake that they'll then take advantage of. Saul Alinsky wrote about it in Rules for Radicals explicitly. Your opponent's reaction is your real action. Get them to do something dumb whenever possible and then frame it so that they look like extremists or whatever else so that you can justify bringing state power or public opinion against them. That's literally their game.
50-something years ago, we abdicated our responsibility in the public square. We don't do the ecclesia, and while we have been playing church, the secular progressive left has dominated the ecclesia.
With education, media, and religion mostly subverted and overtaken, and a legal system that is lax on leftists and criminals but weaponized against conservatives, a total takeover of all key sectors of society is possible. America's businesses are being gutted for the sake of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI.
The main objective of DEI in the businesses is to install a political office in the business, what the Soviets would have called commissars. The goal is to bring in officers who enforce ideological conformity throughout the corporation or the institution. Having a robust diversity, equity, and inclusion department with hired political officers and so on is required for what is called their environmental, social, and governance, ESG scoring. And ESG scoring is really, this is why everything is broken. The S, social, is short for social justice. Obviously, E is environment, and G has to do with how you run your corporation as governance. But the S is social justice. It's literally woke. And so if you aren't woke compliant, you're not going to have a good S score. They're going to use ESG to create a fascist top-down power structure to force corporations and thus through them individuals to do what they want. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum recently said, and this is close to a direct quote from him, so that people understand that we're moving away from an economy of production and consumption and into an economy of caring and sharing, which is communism.
The UN is pushing DEI through their 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They sound nice. There's such things as eradicating poverty, promoting gender equality, responsible consumption and production, and protecting health and the environment. But of course, just like any communist entity, they need centralized power in order to enforce their nice-sounding goals. In this case, power centralized at the global level.
Communist societies never figured out how to produce because they don't understand human nature and they can't get to the part where they make stuff. which means what they are good at is conquest. They're good at capturing resources that somebody else produced. They're good, in other words, at taking advantage of a capitalist or feudal system that has accrued resources, and when they take those over, they steal them. They use them to produce more communism until the institution dies, at which point it doesn't matter, they move on to the next thing. Their goal is actually to capture everything they can, kill everything they cannot capture. When they capture it, it's to use its accrued resources, physical capital, financial capital, social capital, cultural capital, human capital, and run it into the ground on the program of creating more communism.
And then what you do is you degrow the United States. You have the United States and the West commit economic suicide to then make sure that the new system of China, which is actually the system that you helped build, because every president basically from Johnson on has basically moved all of our economic base, all of our manufacturing to China, to Taiwan, to Thailand, to Vietnam, to be the world's factory, while we are simply the world's consumers. And people forget that one of the probably the most ancient of military strategies within the Roman understanding of things was divide et impera, divide and conquer. So that's DEI, if you want to say that. We understand as diversity, equity, inclusion, but what you're doing is you're dividing a nation, setting the nation against one another. Create animosity, create tension to where the races or the religions and so forth that make up that area, which is multicultural, how can you set them against one another and basically destroy that spine or that backbone, which was the thing that held them together for centuries? Because you look at America, and America was never a nation that was completely homogenous in terms of faith, ethnicity, and so forth. But what brought us together, it's almost like, why do you have a flag? The reason you have a flag, let's say the American flag, is because you look at the stars and the bars, you say, I know what that stands for. And where you have other people that are of different faiths, of different beliefs and so forth, to say, you know, I know what that stands for too. And when you have everyone saying, yeah, we believe in that, and I know what that stands for, that gives me liberty. That gives me freedom. Well, now you have peace. You have unity in something. So the idea is to basically take that flag and shatter it to bits. It's important to remember that we're not just talking about where you would just have people fighting against each other. People of different ethnicities, different religions, different beliefs fighting against each other, but you're also moving people out of an economy and a system of abundance into an economy and system of scarcity. So within that degrowth movement, what you're going to do is start to basically take control of farming. You're going to start taking control of any kind of food production and so forth. And within that, people are going to lose their lives. There are some people that are going to starve to death. You're also moving people out of the concept of being able to have antibiotics and other medications freely. Because remember, all those things are made overseas now.
Religion will most definitely persist. There's just going to be one new religion, one world religion of sustainability and inclusion. Think of it like a diamond with a bunch of faces, right? So a diamond is one stone, but it has all these surfaces that reflect and refract light, and you get the sparkle, the fire in the stone. And so one of those faces might be Catholicism. One of those faces might be LDS Mormon. One of those faces might be Southern Baptist. One of those faces might be Muslim. One of those faces might be Buddhist, whatever it is, in Judaism. All the different faces. But there's one faith, which is sustainability and inclusion. The only way for that to be possible is to make sure that there's very little religious liberty. All of the religions that are approved are going to have to teach the same message. They're going to incentivize church organizations to participate the right way, and they're going to disincentivize independence.
You have churches that are going to be on board with this. See, because they're not going to listen to the corporate oligarchs. They're also not going to listen to the politicians. But if you have a man with a collar If you have the man of faith that's leading their large evangelical congregation and says to them, you know, it's a sin what we're doing with capitalism. Look at all the economic disparity that we have out there. Think of all the people that are oppressed. We need to have a system that really distributes the economic, forces that we have out more fairly with all of us. And the reason that you do that is because people are not going to say, yeah, we're on with basically destroying our economic future. We're all for destroying the economic future for our children and our grandchildren to make sure that the global south and China rises. Why don't we just help everybody?
This world collective, this world religion, I mean, that's really what they want at the end of the day. They want to water down religion to basically be like a spiritual soup.
They want to centralize power instead of push it down into the hands of the people like our founders did.
The wonderful thing about the way our system of government is set up is that it's enshrined in our founding documents that our rights come from God, right? That our rights are inalienable and immutable. The UN especially, they believe that you don't have any rights that they don't give you, and that collective rights will always usurp your individual rights because, again, you are one. You are one spirituality or one collective, and so you always need to value that over your own individual rights, and that's not what America was founded on.
What you want to do is end what was so you can bring in something new. And that something new is the fourth industrial revolution that leads into technocratic, autocratic tyranny. That's where this all goes.
It's all about destroying the U.S. economy and the U.S. military so Communist China and its allies can easily defeat America.
The gulag could be digital as well. Ultimately, the goal will be to gather the data to make a system so robust through your devices and through the things you have to interact with that you brainwash yourself. So maybe they strap your head into goggles. They tell you, you don't have a social credit score, so you can't leave your apartment, but you can watch these cool movies and play these cool video games in your augmented reality goggles all day long. Here's some propaganda for you. By the way, we'll also let a drone come by and drop off a pizza or give you a universal basic income to pay you for the data they're extracting out of your head, because that data builds the system AI-guided tyranny that's keeping you locked in your apartment in the first place. This doesn't work. They'll just liquidate you, exterminate you. They've never had any problem doing that in historical communist regimes.
We need not just to monitor people, we need to monitor what's happening under their skin. But exactly the same technology can determine what you think about the government. The television could be monitoring you and knowing whether you're angry or not, just by analyzing the cues, the biological cues coming from your body. The future Stalins of the 21st century, they could be watching the minds, the brains of all the population all the time. You just have a lot of sensors and an AI which analyzes it, and that's it. You have the worst totalitarian regime in history.
Many of our citizens are being radicalized to see conservatives and the unwoke as the enemy.
Donald Trump is the greatest threat the world faces.
I think you need to go back and punch him in the face.
That he should be put under the jail.
As long as Donald Trump is in the White House, our nation is in danger.
There needs to be unrest in the streets.
Don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
President Trump is a serious threat to U.S. national security.
Have to stand up against it and fight them.
Allegedly told the Secret Service he had driven from California to Las Vegas on June 16th to kill Trump.
Joe Biden becomes U.S. president, but how dangerous does Donald Trump remain?
What's going on in the Trump movement is terroristic. It's Mad Max.
This is the insurrectionist president.
How dangerous Trump will remain.
President Trump is a con man.
This is a dangerous person and evil.
A man dressed to look like President Donald Trump gets stabbed to death on stage.
There's an extremist movement, the MAGA movement. He's a punk, he's a dog, he's a pig, a mutt, this fool, this bozo. It makes me so angry.
What else do you suggest?
Murder.
I will shoot Donald Trump Sr. and Barron Trump straight in the face.
If re-elected, he will be a dictator.
And we cannot let that happen.
Should never again have the chance to stand behind a microphone.
I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Trump is a threat to this nation.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? It's been a while. Maybe it's time.
They're still going to have to go out and put a bullet in Donald Trump.
The bandage was just over his ear. It should have been over his mouth.
Don't miss Trump next time.
Fuck the dude, the firefighter guy.
The firefighter who was killed, meantime, in the shooting was laid to rest today in Pennsylvania.
Fuck Trump. Fuck the people that support him. I just want you to know, okay? Just in case you're confused or it seems like I'm, you don't, whatever. If one of you were in the crowd and you're a conservative fan of mine and you end up, getting blown away or whatever the fuck, I'm making fun of you the next day on Twitter. I am. 100%.
You create a dynamic that has no better names than hate craft. The idea is that life is being made pretty bad, actually. The communist programs don't work, education's failing, food distribution starts to break down, there's not enough energy, whatever the issues is, it's crime, things are getting worse and worse and worse. And the reason that it's happening is because of the people who won't get along with the program. And so the enemies of the people are the reason why everything's getting worse and worse. So what the people who are not paying that much attention in the world are experiencing is that things are getting worse. They don't know why things are getting worse. And then everything in the media, from the politicians and the entire messaging apparatus of the communist propaganda machine is saying that it's the people who won't get their vaccines, it's the people who are racist, it's the people who are transphobes that are keeping us from having a good society. This creates an incredible social pressure where parents go against children, children go against parents, neighbors against neighbors, snitch culture, telling on your neighbor, oh, well, so-and-so's not going along with the program, he wouldn't go to bias training at work, tattling on people, turning them into the authorities, demanding people go, because people want to get their lives back. They want things to work again. They want more energy. They want good food. They want their society to work. And the messaging is so consistent and so effective. The propaganda is that the people classified as the problem, whether it's racists or transphobes or whatever, extending out into white people, normal people, people who will and won't do the public health. This is the source of the problem. So this is literally how you tear a society apart.
Just the attacks on our children, the war on our children here, and connecting it to what happens in a communist regime like Cambodia and what they did with children and how they destroyed families and how they indoctrinated children to the point where you had kids kill their own parents.
The family stability is a potent antidote to a cult.
Some of the craftiest strategies we've ever seen to destabilize the family are through the sexualization of children through sexually graphic books in the schools.
It's very disturbing that we are allowing what really amounts to pornography in schools in the name of some kind of gay representation in the whole sex education arena. This isn't something we would have accepted for straight kids, the kind of pornographic cartoons that are in there, the technical instruction on how to insert a butt plug or how to use software in order to find a sex partner. Even though the laws and even the software policies say don't do it, we have literature that's explaining how to do it, how to hide it from your parents. And then therefore you're going to have kids who are entering into an adult sex arena with perverts who want to exploit that. And so we have schools that are, through these books, helping kids undermine the parents, and then you have the indoctrination aspect. And that is convincing kids that this sort of sexual perversion is normal, that it's appropriate. Those books are abhorrent. They don't represent the gays, truly. They don't represent gay interests.
This reminds me so much of the first time we had sex. We were both fucking terrified, and the whole thing was kind of terrible because we didn't know what we were doing. But it was good too, so good. Now, this book was at my middle school, and it was on a stand. When I rented it out to show my dad it, the librarian asked if I wanted more and if I wanted a graphic novel version.
Hello, Navarro. Suck any good lately. What's wrong, Navarro? I think you like a big in your mouth. Ha ha ha. Page 23. The other boy, page 23. It's in your library. Here it is. What's the educational benefit of talking about What's the educational benefit of talking about that?
The goal appears to be the destabilization of this rising generation like none other before.
Whatever system gets installed, you will eventually need productive people. That's not this phase of the revolution. They need completely unproductive people. They need people who are being, as the phrasing goes, made woke. And the goal with that is actually to teach them to see problems everywhere, to complain always, to feel entitled, that their self-esteem is the most important possible thing to focus on. How does that make me feel? Am I happy today? Do I feel comfortable today?
It's turned very militant. It's very violent. How wound up people are because they're filled with hate. It's not a matter of I'm trying to find myself, but now I have to angrily fight against anybody who says anything about this ideology because they're bigots, they're racists, they're homophobes, they're transphobes, this, that, and the other. And all of those ideas have been fed into them by outside forces.
What people need to understand is what's happening in America, in the school systems, when we are sitting back going, why is this happening? How are we here? We are here because the Marxist communist agenda has been at play for decades. They have given marching orders for their useful idiots, right? To get jobs as teachers, to become administrators, to get on school boards. We are so behind this. We are just now starting to understand. They've been at this for decades. We're just now putting our boots on and tying our shoelaces. They've already gone around the world a few times.
They are coming for your kids. They want your kids. They need your kids. Your kids are the revolution for them.
I was beaten up. They didn't care, my classmates, that I had bruises, that I had emotional bruises too. They wanted to do what they thought was right. And that's what I'm beginning to see here now. And it scares me. My family lived through that. I lived through that. I don't want to live through that again.
People's War means to destroy the opposing country through unconventional methods before your soldiers even march. It means to kill your enemy with fentanyl. It means to co-opt their politicians. It means to destroy their borders. It means to turn their kids' heads to mush with TikTok and social media. It means to corrupt Hollywood. It means to co-opt Wall Street. It means to buy up infrastructure, buy up farmland. It means to sabotage food production plants, shut down factories, put solar panels on good productive farmland. All of it is strategic, directed by our enemies to weaken this country in preparation for war and conquest. If we're going to save the West, we have to save America. Because if America goes down, every Western country will fall. And we will have a neo-communist empire stretching across the whole planet.
And every communist revolution in history has exactly one thing in common, besides the communists, which is that the people that were getting put through it realized they were dealing with communism one day too late.
This country is not going to be saved by its political leadership or its religious leadership. They have shown us they are feet of clay, and many of them are co-opted by our enemies. This country is going to be saved by grassroots people of faith, grassroots patriots who I see rising up in every state.
And so I cannot urge parents strongly enough to remove your children from these indoctrination centers now. Yesterday would have been better, but it's better late than never. Get them out now, because you are essentially playing Russian roulette with your children.
We have what we call our 2L strategy. We focus on legislative policy making and working with legislators, bringing awareness to certain bills or blocking bills and opposing bills. And we also have our other L strategy, which is litigation. Those are the two things that we're going to need to do if we're really going to stop this. We're really going to have to set policies that protect children, and we're going to have to start suing the crap out of people.
Protecting and nourishing a healthy family is absolutely crucial to defending against communist infiltration. It's very, very important that we have some aspect of healthy spiritual life. The left are community organizers. The right organizes communities through churches. Well, we're going to need some organized resistance to communist revolution.
Take over your local county, take over your local state, get your state to give the federal government the finger.
Disobedience to tyrants is obedience to God. I would rather be in a jail for my convictions than living silently on my knees in compromise to truth.
We're only going to be saved by telling the truth. Telling the truth takes courage. Courage is proof of faith.
If there's one thing that one side shouldn't do to another, that's imposing themselves on the other side.
I think that this religious liberty and individual liberty is the most important value that we fight for, and it is the value ultimately represented by the U.S. flag.
If the church wants to be liked, they won't survive. If they want to stand regardless of the consequences of truth, they're going to be respected. And there will be a new birth of freedom.
We have got to be skeptical of emotionally manipulative, one-sided news coverage against anyone.
Just like you can't trust the CDC, you can't by default trust your pastor. You better be checking. You better be asking questions. You better be checking him against Scripture.
Fight back. You know, get involved, do what you can, because every single person is needed in this fight.
What people need to understand is there is no time for complacency. There is no time to sit back and think that someone else is going to fight this for you.
I think this country is going to need some divine providence to get out of this mess. But does God ever come down and save a bunch of cowardly, gutless, moaning wimps? Have you ever seen that in any chapter in the Bible? It's always been the courageous, the David versus Goliath, Gideon's army versus the horde, the American revolutionaries with their squirrel rifles up against the world's greatest military empire, fighting for the principle that man's rights come from God, not the government. You can't tell me there was no divine providence in the American Revolution. The famous fog that came down on New York Harbor just at the right time to save George Washington's troops. You know, the bullets that went through George Washington's hat but never through him. There was divine providence, but people had to fight and bleed and sacrifice and put their lives on the line to show that they deserved it.
I watched people go to two different directions. Some almost turned into animals, willing to do anything, becoming angry and absolutely losing the humanity. And I saw people go to the other direction, giving the little that they had to someone else, caring, helping, being compassionate. And if there's anything that I can say, even during the worst times, I think for me there's something more important than my life. And that's the belief that we're here to help each other.
Everywhere that a communist system has been set up, it's a disaster. It's not just a disaster, it's a crisis. It's people dying and being killed by the millions. Terrible situation that's terribly oppressive. Everybody who's inside of it is a slave. Nobody has any freedom. Nobody has any rights. Everything becomes arbitrary. Purges are common. And then what? How do you get out? There are two ways out of a communist tyranny. Two. One is you shoot your way out if somehow you can, so your kids fight a war that you gave them because you didn't stand up and say, I think that this policy at my company is really bad and we shouldn't do it. So your kids, your grandkids, are slaves until they fight a war. The other way is that the communist entity itself collapses completely, killing millions in the process. Both futures are horrifically bad for your kids, your grandkids. You are literally throwing away their inheritance because you're afraid to get called names, which is where it is right. You're afraid you might lose your job. You're afraid you might not be able to go to the country club or the social club. You're afraid you're going to have to make new friends. You're afraid you're going to have to hold an opinion that somebody called conservative that Jon Stewart made fun of on TV when you were a teenager and it scarred you psychologically. And you're handing your kids slavery and death as a result. That's what's going on. Why does communism always result in slavery and death? Because it is a false view of reality, of human reality specifically. Communism believes that communism works if and only if every human being who is still alive believes properly in communism. Which means when it doesn't work, when anything goes wrong, and it's always going to go wrong, it's the fault of the people who didn't believe enough, who now have to be found, identified, re-educated further, brainwashed further, or killed to make sure the system can keep working better in the future. This is why it is a downward spiral into destruction. One of the most consequential lies of history is that Karl Marx put forth an economic theory or doctrine. He did not. He put forth a totalitarian religion that forces people to remake themselves into something that they are not and never will be in order for it to succeed, and that empowers the worst psychopathic bullies to harass, harangue, torture, and murder anybody who doesn't go along because they blame them for all of the problems in life. That's what he actually put forth, is a evil religion that can only destroy, that can only consume. It will never work. You cannot fundamentally remake humanity to be the socialist man or Soviet man. It can only result in death. If we don't stand up and speak up and tell the truth and take the risks and start carving out new paths toward success, which we can find and do, now you hand your kids slavery, death, and war. And it's theirs to fight because you didn't do it.
Communism isn't sleeping. It is, as always, plotting, scheming, working, and fighting.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It has to be fought for and defended. This is the recurrent challenge, the one from which we cannot shrink.
So if you run into one of their woke buzzwords today, it's probably a repackaged Soviet idea.
We have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke.
We all know now that woke means communism.
And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker.
And so if you can learn to decode that, you can see.
And just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
There are ravening wolves in sheep's clothing all over the place.
We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. revolution. We will not comply with the institutions. Sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
The revolution won't be televised. Government been telling lies. If you're not with us, you better step aside. Witnessing a genocide. Everything is centralized. The food that we consume and they spraying it out with pesticides. Easily identify the sheep and the snake, the real and the fake, giving us a reason to pray. I'ma make my own choices. A voice for the voiceless. They trying to destroy us, avoiding the poison. It's all pointless if you don't have a purpose. If you read the verses, you'll know who we versing. Government can't tell you what your worth is. Look deeper than the surface. They don't even want you researching or asking questions. We all being tested. Shh. Shut your mouth and comply, that's the message. Want you depressed on prescriptions that mess with your head. Got you stressing, suppressing expression.
We will not comply with the institutions. Sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institutions. Sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
The revolution won't be televised. Government been telling lies. If you're not with us, you better step aside. Witnessing a genocide. Everything is centralized. The food that we consume and they spraying it out with pesticides. Easily identify the sheep and the snake, the real and the fake, giving us a reason to pray. I'ma make my own choices. A voice for the voiceless. They trying to destroy us, avoiding the poison. It's all pointless if you don't have a purpose. If you read the verses, you'll know who we versing. Government can't tell you what your worth is. Look deeper than the surface. They don't even want you researching or asking questions. We all being tested. Shh. Shut your mouth and comply, that's the message. Want you depressed on prescriptions that mess with